We're back here at the Self-Reliance Festival, and I have CJ Kilmer here with me. We had him on about 18 months ago.
Yep.
So what's going on?
I don't know. I'm here and speaking tomorrow and speaking on some stuff that's not what I normally speak on.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about how I managed to, and I'm still trying to figure out how I did it so I know what the hell to say tomorrow. But I'm actually speaking about kind of personal stuff and how I and my family have gone through like our own small scale shit hit the fan end of the world kind of experience the last few years, and how I've managed to well, I should say I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I'm also somebody who has struggled his entire life with like real severe clinical depression. And how I managed to make it through the last couple of years without anything going worse, like my marriage falling apart, killing myself, not to make light of it or whatever, but when you suffer from depression, obviously that's where it can go if you don't manage it. So the COVID lockdowns, I was a psychological victim of the psychological warfare that was waged against all of us. So I was teaching college history full time when it happened, and it made my day-to-day life miserable. Like, if you were trying to design a scenario where people with pre-existing, mental health issues and whatever just get
Amplifies.
completely, knocked off their ass and, into a downward spiral, you couldn't do much better than the COVID lockdowns.
So did you find yourself at home more, or not out in public as much, or not able to travel? What was the biggest, just because they closed the school down?
Yeah. So even though I'm in Florida, and so it wasn't quite as bad there as a lot of other places, and it started to reopen a little more quickly than most other states. But nonetheless, colleges were still allowed a fairly free hand to impose. They couldn't impose vax mandates and things like that. But in terms of just like making all classes online, putting crazy restrictions on when you're actually on campus. So for a year, all of my classes were online. And I always hated online classes, and it's not because I have a problem with using technology. I'm a podcaster, so that's not an issue for me. But I never liked online classes for like regular classes for a variety of reasons, and I always resisted and did as few online classes as I could. And then COVID comes. For a year, everybody is teaching from home, all online, and that made me miserable. And then on top of that, because I had not been teaching online classes much at all, I had to build my online classes from scratch. So I felt like I was under house arrest.
Do you think that online is it that it's different, or do you think it's more difficult than in person?
It's a lot more tedious
Okay.
than in person, just because things like, if a student has an issue and it's an in-person class, very often we can handle it and resolve it in a friendly way with a 5-minute conversation after class or whatever. And when it's online, it turns into like an endless back and forth email exchange about even just minor little issues the student has or whatever. And I've also found that students in online classes is very similar to like how people on social media are often way bigger of dicks than they ever would be if they actually had to talk to you eye to eye.
Yeah.
So the students tend to just be more of assholes, for, lack of a better term. And they give you a lot more crap, and everything turns into a giant, 20 back and forth email exchange about some little complaint they have about class or whatever. It's very tedious. The online platforms are very tedious and time consuming to run. Even something simple like building a quiz for a class becomes this like huge long project I got to do on the back end. Whereas, in person, I just type up a quiz, print it, and give it to them to take or whatever. So everything was just, I felt like I was working twice as many hours as I had, and I'm still getting the same pay. And my just my day-to-day life turned into this depressing Groundhog Day of getting up, being in my house all day, which, I work from home now as a podcaster, but it's different because I'm choosing to do it. I don't have all the hassles of, interacting with students and all like that. But yeah, I mean, it was isolation. I hadn't really thought about it before it happened, But even little things that you take for granted, like going into work and chatting with coworkers who were my friends and stuff like that, like that's all gone. And it just put me into a very, very downward spiral of depression. And then I started self medicating because, of course, the liquor stores were
Oh, yeah.
an essential business, So it's one of those things where just incrementally, I'm like, well, it's Tuesday night, but fuck it, I'll have a few. And it just gradually got to where, I was getting legit drunk like 5 to 7 nights a week after a while.
What was the catalyst where you seeked change? What caused that?
Honestly, it was my wife.
Okay.
It was my wife kind of putting her foot down, and I don't blame her for it, and kind of saying like, hey, you need to get this under control. And so I quit drinking in February of 23, but then I had a rough withdrawal experience. And so for months on end, I felt horribly brain fogged, and my depression got worse, and I felt almost like I had the flu a lot of the time, and I was just miserable. And so even though I was sober, my depression got worse for months, to where a little over a year ago, I was really bad with the depression, even though I was still sober. And again, my wife, I give her credit, had to kind of put her foot down and be like, you got to do something. You got to start turning this around. So I've been working on that. And then right as I was starting to get my mental health under decent control there, another disaster struck. My wife had back problems since before I knew her, owing to an injury that she had 20 plus years ago. And she'd already had a couple of back surgeries over the years. And then last November, her back just suddenly one day just blew up. I don't even know how else to put it. She was in screaming pain, and I wasn't there. I was working a job. By this point, I had resigned my teaching job because I couldn't do it anymore, and I was working selling guitars at Guitar Center, a county away, and she was home alone with just one of my kids there, and suddenly her back put her in so much pain she couldn't even speak coherently. She was just screaming in pain. And my teenage daughter had to actually call an ambulance to bring her to the hospital because I was 45 minutes away. And she got a back surgery and didn't get much relief from that. And then in March of this year, she had a back fusion surgery. I think it was 3 of her vertebrae got fused together. And unfortunately, she didn't get as much relief from that as we were hoping. And so she is now like legit disabled. Her mobility is very limited. She can walk, but she needs either a cane or a walker to walk more than just down the hallway. And she had to leave her job, which was pretty good paying job that she had for many years. So our family is dealing with, she's pretty crippled. That's a huge blow to kind of a family's
Sure.
overall health and everything like that. And she's still to this day in a lot of chronic pain much of the time. And we lost the income from her job, obviously. So horrible stress. On the plus side, and this is I guess what I'm supposed to be trying to sort of explain. Even though we've been dealing with that, I've managed to repair my relationship so that my marriage is now very good. Probably the strongest it's been maybe ever, but certainly in a decade or more. I repaired my relationship with my kids, and I've been able to get my family, at least up till now, through all of this without, on my part, either falling off the wagon and becoming a drunk again, or falling down the depression rabbit hole to where I was, a year ago, where I was borderline suicidal. And so that's what Nicole asked me to speak about. And she said, are you okay speaking about something that kind of personal and whatever? I said, it's not what I normally talk about. Normally I go to these things and I'm talking about like collapsing empires and historical stuff and why Woodrow Wilson's a jerk and whatever. But now it's sort of like, how people can try to navigate their own kind of personal and family shit hit the fan scenarios. And I'm still not 100% sure how I did it, to be honest with you, that I've been able to get us through this All that we've been through the last couple of years, especially the last year, while still maintaining my family as a healthy unit and not letting myself get pulled back, down into oblivion. I will say though, one of the things, and this was just sort of luck. It wasn't intentional or planned on my part, but one of the things that did help me was I got a job. It was just sort of luck when I was getting ready to leave Guitar Center because that job was driving me nuts. One of my coworkers just happened to mention, "Hey, maybe you should go work for my husband." I said, "Well, what does he do?" And she said, "Well, he's a manager at a company that cleans the undersides of boats. So it's Florida, so there's marinas everywhere, and yeah, you dive under the boat, and you're underwater, banging off barnacles and scraping algae off of boats and whatever like that. Maybe you should do that. It pays a bit better than Guitar Center, and it'll give you a good workout and whatever." And I said, "You know what? I'll give it a try." And it's not anything I had ever done. Like, it's completely outside my resume. But I went and did it, and I actually found, even though it was physically brutal beyond any job I've ever done, it was just the most exhausting thing in the world to be. I mean, the way I describe it is, imagine you've got a car that's dirty beyond belief. It's just, caked with stuff that you have to literally scrape off of it. Now imagine you've got to go take care of that with nothing but hand tools. Now imagine you're doing it underwater.
In the dark.
Yeah, in water that, very often looks like coffee, and, there might be sharks or gators swimming around and you wouldn't even know because
That was my
you
next
can't see
question.
anything.
Have you seen an alligator in there?
Yeah. I never had any really scary calls with that. I mean, probably there were things going on I didn't know about because the water was so murky. I probably don't want to know how many times there was a big shark swimming by.
Are you breath hold, or are you surface supply just off a hookah?
Yeah, off a hookah usually. You can breath hold if it's a little boat, if it's like a little deck boat or a pontoon boat or whatever, you don't need air. But yeah, you're breathing through a hose usually. And, I've cleaned boats ranging from like 15-foot Boston whalers and 20-foot pontoon boats all the way up to yachts in the 70-foot range. So it was an adventure. It was an adventure. And I actually found it, it got me in great shape. And I found it very psychologically helpful, for lack of a better term. There's the positives of like being outside and working outside. That has all
Physical
kinds of
labor,
benefits.
yeah.
Yeah, and working myself to exhaustion. 5 days a week, often working overtime. So, I got in good shape, but it was a very kind of zen thing for me a lot of the time. You're underwater, it's pitch black, you're trying to clean the hull of a boat by feel. There's who knows what swimming around that might bite you or whatever. But I enjoyed it. And I had to quit it a few months ago just because my hands were giving out on me. A combination of arthritis and nerve pain and things. I just physically couldn't do it anymore. But looking back now with hindsight, and again, it wasn't anything I thought about like, oh, this job is going to help me feel better and help me to manage stress better. And, but it did. And now that I'm 2 months out from doing that job, I actually kind of miss it. But it was a really cool experience, and I actually had multiple times where I had what I don't know what to call them other than Zen moments, where I'd be hanging to the underside of a boat. There's heavy current trying to pull me out to the ocean. I'm basically Spider-Man, upside down under a boat, crawling around trying to clean stuff off or whatever, and I would feel this like blissful happiness of almost meditation. So yeah, that's one of my secrets that I would suggest to somebody going through stuff like I was going through is see if you can find a job that is physically very demanding, preferably outside, preferably a little bit dangerous and scary, because I had to multiple times a day, I had to jump into the water that most people would look at and go, I'm not going in there. And so, like, literally every day I had to kind of, like, face fears, and force myself to jump into the water. And I started the job when it was still kind of cold, too, and even with a wetsuit, it was But a job that's physically uncomfortable, that's physically difficult, preferably outside, and has some danger that you have to face on a daily basis. It's the only job I've never been, military, police, first responder, whatever. Like I've never done anything like that. So this was the first job, for example, I ever had where on day one they issue you a tourniquet. They're giving you all your tools and gear and your kind of web gear harness sort of thing that you clip all your tools to on lanyards and whatever, and going over all kinds of things on my orientation day. And then they're like, and here's a tourniquet. And almost everybody else in the job, maybe everybody, I don't know, I can't think of any other exceptions other than myself. I was older than most of the guys that do this job. Most of the guys that do this job, they're in their 20s or early 30s. I'm in my 40s. And I think all the other guys that do this job, they're all either ex-military or ex-law enforcement or both. And there's me, a 40-something-year-old history professor who didn't have scuba experience before taking this job, who's never been in the military, never been law enforcement first responder. And I think a lot of them kind of counted me out and didn't think that I would last more than like a couple of days, if that. But I managed to stick it out for 4 months.
Did you get scuba certified?
Yes, I did.
They made you do that?
Yep.
Got it.
Yeah, and that was a really cool experience. I grew up in Florida. I grew up in and around the water all the time. Snorkeled a ton, fishing, wade fishing, kayaking, all kinds of stuff. But I just never done the scuba thing, just because I never knew anybody that did that, so I never even really thought about it.
So you have basic open water, and you're with Nowie or Patty or...
Yes. Yeah, and that was a really cool experience. We did our last certification dive we did was at a place called Devil's Den, which is a little bit outside Gainesville. And it is an underground spring where, you take these stairs down through a cave and go in there. It's a really neat place. Anybody who's into diving, if you just want a really cool place to check out, go to Devil's Den. And I actually have a picture somewhere of when we went all the way down as deep as you can go in there, which was like 60, 70 feet down, something like that. I managed to dial in my buoyancy just right. I was hovering like a foot off the bottom, and I got into a lotus position and did my meditation, and one of my buddies
got a photo
of it. And it's still like one of my proudest things to come out of that is just like, yeah. And I really did feel it when I was down there hovering off the bottom of a spring inside of a cave. It was another one of those moments like being under a giant yacht in pitch darkness where I just kind of felt like I'm okay.
That's awesome. So what are you doing now?
Now I'm trying to make another go. I had tried and failed because I was still a drunk at the time, but I had tried and failed to make my podcast into a full-time gig a couple of years ago. So when my hands started giving out on me and I realized, I can't keep doing this, I had intended to do the dive job for probably at least a year or two. I knew I couldn't do it forever because I'm in my 40s and it was beating the hell out of me. But when I finally realized, my hands are giving out, I literally can't do the job. Because we also, aside from cleaning the boats, we would do things like changing out the anodes, things like that require a lot of hand strength and dexterity. And my hands were just causing me pain and losing feeling and whatever. I can't do this much longer. I actually, because of the tough financial situation my family's in with my wife's disability and everything like that, I actually said, oh man, I'm going to have to swallow my pride and all of my disgust with kind of standard conventional teaching jobs, and I'm going to have to go get another teaching job. So I applied for probably around a dozen teaching jobs in my area. I got 3 interviews. I got no job offers. Somebody with a master's degree in history. I taught college history for 16 years, but even like local high schools didn't want to offer me a job. So once the school year got going and I realized, I didn't get anything, and that's kind of closed. I said, I think this is a reflection of me getting my mental health into a better place. My initial sort of gut reaction when I realized like the last of the teaching jobs I applied for, I hadn't got. My initial reaction for just a moment was to start to fall into depression loop mode and go, oh, the world's against me. I couldn't even get a job at a cruddy little high school to teach history. This is horrible, whatever. But I didn't do that for very long, just for a moment. And then, I looked at it differently and I said, well, maybe this is karma, the universe, God, whatever, giving me another chance. Maybe this is the comeback part of the movie, and we'll still, it's still up in the air whether that's correct or not. We'll see if it pans out. But maybe now, now that I'm no longer a horribly depressed drunk, and with all that I've been through, maybe now I actually have what it takes to make my podcast and other things I'm doing and starting online into something that can support my family. Plus, to be honest with you, my wife needs me to be around as much as possible, because she still sometimes has issues where she'll be walking around the house and suddenly her back gives out and she needs help, or things like that. And I don't want to be an hour away and not able to come help. It's a lot better if I'm just on the other side of the house working on a podcast episode and she can yell or text me or whatever. It's, I need help, and I can just run across the house and help her.
When you seeked assistance for alcoholism, did you go to a meeting, or how did that happen? Was there an intervention? Like, what was the first step you took?
Yeah, I didn't do the 12-step thing. Anybody who does that, if it works for them, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. It obviously works for a lot of people. I have mixed feelings about the 12-step thing. I definitely think there's a lot of good stuff there, and I'm familiar with it. I've read the AA books, and I sort of took the Bruce Lee approach of, I'm going to take the parts of this that I think are going to help me, and the parts of this that I don't think will help me just because they don't jive with my personality and everything like that, I'm going to ignore those. I did talk with a therapist every single week for 6 months, and it was primarily about managing the addiction and also managing my depression. And I probably should have kept doing that. I am going to restart with another therapist again soon, probably. But he was good at helping me kind of get through that tough transition time. A lot of practical cognitive behavioral therapy sorts of things of, how to kind of retrain the loops and things that your mind goes on, to avoid getting pulled into those spirals. And then I had an informal network of friends and things, including a few people who've been through similar things, who've kicked addictions and whatever. So I sort of did my own DIY kind of AA, for lack of a better term. And I found after a while, especially once I got through the worst of the withdrawal, that, and who knows how long this will last. Maybe, I'll need AA at some point. I don't know. But, I've managed to stay sober for well over 18 months now, and I don't miss it most of the time. I don't have cravings very often anymore. And really, I'm kind of happy to have that monkey off my back at this point.
Good. Yeah. So when you're working, do you have a new podcast episode that you're working right now?
I've got a few that I've got in the works. I actually just launched a second podcast that is getting into more of kind of the philosophical and psychological stuff that I've always been interested in, but especially the last few years, this stuff has become extra important to me, to try and make sense of things and help me get through the hardships that I've been going through and the mental struggles and stress and things. But in terms of Dangerous History, which has been the show that I've been doing for 10 years now, the next one that I've got coming out that I was hoping to get done before coming here, but I just didn't end up having the time to do it, I'm going to actually be covering a little bit of stuff in connection with Kamala Harris. So I figured that's a good one to definitely get out before the election, because especially if she loses, no one's going to care much anymore if I expose some stuff about her. But there's just some interesting connections that go back to her childhood in the Bay Area, where I see some things that look suspiciously like the footprints of intelligence I'm not saying that she is a full-blown CIA asset or, Manchurian candidate for intelligence agencies or anything like that. Nothing that, grandiose. But that the left, quote unquote, that she comes out of, I, I think it's a mistake to just sort of say she's a communist, because whatever she is, she's not a communist. I mean, the fact that Dick Cheney's endorsing her, and Wall Street, Big Pharma, all the biggest corporations in America are backing her to the hilt. I don't think she's an actual communist by the literal definition of that word. Those people would not be backing a communist into power. I don't like communism either, but that's not what she is.
What do you believe she is?
I think she is pretty much the same thing. That she's just a particularly unlikable version, but she's pretty much the same thing as Barack Obama, the Clintons, the Bushes. She's just another establishment corporatist progressive. And I don't think that she is going to radically change the trajectory we're on. I think the main thing that she's going to do is to just kind of accelerate us down the same path we've been accelerating down for, I mean, really, if you want to take the big picture, since the days of Woodrow Wilson. I mean, Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt, those were the original progressive presidents. And that a lot of what she wants to do is just the, logical next steps down the path of that.
So when you start doing a podcast like that, which you obviously have to accelerate right now to get it out, do you kind of lose interest, fizzle out, and start another one? Are you running 2 or 3 at the same time, or are you able to just compartmentalize and focus on that one and have all the drive and still keep interest in it?
That is a good question. I continually struggle with that. Yeah, another thing that I've sort of discovered as I've been getting therapy and trying to fix myself a bit, I've discovered that I have up till now undiagnosed ADHD. And when I sort of realized that, it made a lot of things make sense, because I've always struggled with organization, time management, focus. And so, yeah, it is a continual struggle, and I keep, trying to find new strategies and things like that to focus. Because, yeah, I'm very often, just like you were saying, I'll be partway through working on a podcast episode. And a lot of the stuff I do is stuff that's very research intensive. I spend hours and hours and hours looking stuff up, reading books, reading obscure documents and things like this, trying to put it together into a coherent story so that I can, in a couple hours or whatever, tell it in a way that people find not just informative, but entertaining and interesting. And it's like an actual narrative that you can follow. And so it takes me many hours. For every hour of podcast I put out, I don't even know. There's probably 100 hours of research and putting notes together in a way that makes sense and whatever like that. And so, yeah, it's very, because it often takes so long for me to go from the idea stage to the final product stage, I'm very vulnerable to getting diverted off, by a squirrel, like that. But I've gotten better.
Are you ever researching and you think you know the story, and then you find some piece of information that just completely changes the direction of the story?
Yes. Yeah. That's happened multiple times, and sometimes I have to kind of go against not only my own expectations, but also against what I think a lot of my audience is expecting. Because my audience is primarily, broadly defined kind of libertarian-ish people who are prone to questioning the official narrative on things and the establishment version of history like that. And so every now and then I have to kind of tell them, oh, this thing that you all kind of believe, that you want to believe because it jives with how you want to see things, is actually not true. And I could probably, if I had a bunch of time to think about it, I could probably come up with a better example. But one that comes to mind is, and I covered this a couple of years ago as part of my Woodrow Wilson series that's still ongoing after 5 years. There's a kind of famous story about Woodrow Wilson, who was a big-time racist and a eugenicist, and I even did a podcast episode about a month ago about Woodrow Wilson's eugenicist. But there's a famous story that when Woodrow Wilson was president, there was a private screening in the White House of the film Birth of a Nation. the original one that is about, the Ku Klux Klan nobly saving the day in the aftermath of the Civil War and reestablishing proper white supremacy and all this sort of thing. It's basically a movie where the Klan are the heroes. And Woodrow Wilson had a private screening of that, and there's a story that's reprinted in a lot of books about Woodrow Wilson that, he came out of it just gushing with praise, saying it was the greatest movie and history was brought to life. And people will point to this and say, look, Woodrow Wilson is saying nice things about a Klan propaganda film, essentially. And I dug down deep into that story and tried to verify, like, what's the real base? Did he really say those things when he came out of watching Birth of a Nation? And I had to come to the conclusion that no, that the evidence that he actually said those things is very, very shaky, and there's a lot of contravening evidence. The evidence seems to be that he had kind of mixed feelings about the movie, and that the quotes usually attributed to him saying, it was the best movie ever, it brought history to life, whatever, that those probably came from people involved with the movie, that they basically kind of made up that, the President of the United States was gushing about how great our movie is. And that,
Interesting. So kind of like Trump with the very fine people thing.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. And so I had to kind of, maybe burst the bubble of a lot of people who wanted to believe that because, it sounds great that, here's this guy endorsing a Klan film. And I had to point out that, no, Wilson definitely was a racist. That's for sure, and not, the way the wokies define racism, where like everybody's racist all the time, and drinking milk is white supremacist, and showing up on time is white supremacist, and all kinds of ridiculous things. If you move into a black neighborhood and you're white, you're gentrifying it. If you move out of a neighborhood that's mostly black and you're white, that means you're white flight. Like pretty much heads you're racist, tails you're racist.
Damned if you do.
Yeah.
Do you think we're better off in this time now, or do you think there's a period in history that was better off? You think like everybody in the existing time, like if you go back 30 years, people always like, I feel like old men are like, these kids these days, and here I am going, these kids these days.
Me too. Yeah, I definitely feel that way. I think the problem is that reality is always so much more complicated than our perceptions or our narratives about it. And so there's always a mixture of things being better and being worse at the same time. So today, there's all kinds of cool stuff about technology, like what we're doing right now. Anybody who's got a podcast or a YouTube channel, especially if they're able to like make a living off of it or whatever, these are amazing opportunities that just didn't exist. I mean, in 1985, I could have all the same ideas about history, and like the best maybe I could do is have like a, low budget newsletter that 100 people read or whatever. And now I can record myself talking about history stories, and at least in theory, millions of people could listen to it. They don't currently, but they might. And so, like, that's way better. And we do have all these great technologies and opportunities that we didn't have before. We got everything from Bitcoin, lots of other ways to, like, what's going on at this event. People spreading all these cool ideas of, like, how to be food self-sufficient. Like, there was so much less ability to spread those ideas and that knowledge in the past. So that's great. On the other hand, our like big picture economic situation is not good. And just me being a grumpy old man now, I think it's an objective fact that our popular culture, which whether you like it or not, popular culture is American culture. Whatever's going on at the New York Opera is not American culture. There's like 10 people that care about that. It's the movies, it's TV shows, it's popular music, whatever. And I really do think that stuff is objectively worse than it was when I was growing up. And I don't think it's just my subjective opinion. I've noticed, like, if you drive by a high school when it's dismissal time and you're seeing all these teenagers coming out, pay attention to ones that are wearing band shirts of like musical artists and bands and things. And what you'll notice is, just like when we were kids, you'll still see plenty of like Led Zeppelin, right? Jimi Hendrix, Black Sabbath, all kinds of stuff like that. And you won't see, I don't even know what, if any, is the like modern equivalent of that. Like, is there any current artist who's not like a bunch of boomers in their 70s, like the Rolling Stones or whatever? Are there any current artists that are like big in the mainstream? I know there's great independent, music and whatever. I listen to a lot of it myself. But as far as like big stuff, or just go back and look at like, pick a random weekend in 1987 and look at what movies were in the theater. And you look back at it from today's perspective and you're like 90% of those movies are pretty damn good. Mm-hmm. And back then they were considered like mid, but by the standards of the crap that Hollywood puts out now, like even a very mid movie from the 80s or 90s is a masterpiece compared to what's coming out now.
So what do you think the cause of that is?
That's a good question. I think there's sort of a natural cultural degeneration. This links back to what I talked about the last time I was here a year and a half ago, of the United States being an empire in decline. And that I think when an empire is in decline, the culture sort of naturally tends to kind of degenerate in the sense of like things get dumber, things get more crass, things get much more like ham-fisted on the nose propagandistic than they used to be. And just in general, people's aesthetic standards get lowered. So I think that's going on, but then I think there also is sort of a conspiratorial angle too. Like I do think for sure that the big entertainment corporations, who are also at the same time being nudged by giant financial institutions, they are deliberately doing things like jamming woke propaganda into like literally every movie and TV show that comes out now, even when it doesn't fit, doesn't make sense with the story, where it's like really off-putting and way too on the nose. That there is a conscious top-down push behind that as well. That's probably just making things worse. Like they would naturally be declining, the quality of our arts and entertainment would naturally be declining, and now it's just being accelerated.
And then add to that the manipulation through social media, the amplification of the craziness, right?
For sure, yeah, all the big tech censorship that we now know about, that we all knew, but now we really know, right? We all could kind of tell forensically by just looking.
Been caught.
Yeah,
and admitted.
Yeah, and Elon Musk deserves, a medal for that, if nothing else.
Right, he bought a crime scene.
Yeah.
So if you could travel back to a point in history, where would you go and how long would you want to stay there?
Ooh.
If you could come back to today?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think to just be a tourist, it would be really cool to go back and just walk around, observe, like especially if you could be invisible and just walk around and not have anybody want to kill you because you're dressed in modern clothes or whatever. I think it would be really cool to go back to something like ancient Rome.
Okay.
And just look around and observe and try to see like how much of what we think life was like is actually what it was like. And this is a Dan Carlin idea, but I think it's a good one. It would be really cool, for example, to go back and one of these giant ancient battles that we still study, like the Battle of Cannae or something like that, go and maybe get in a hot air balloon.
Okay.
And just like hover over, and what does it look like when 60,000 guys go at it with swords and shields? Like, what does that actually look like? How did the battle really play out? Because we've got all these, secondhand accounts that people wrote down later, and we try to forensically like look at the battlefield physically and figure out where the different units were and what they were doing. It'd be really cool to just watch it actually happen, and to be surprised by the stuff that doesn't play out the way we assume it would.
So on similar question, if you could go back in history and meet one person and interview them, who would you want to interview, and what exactly would you want to ask them about?
I think it would be interesting to go back in time and talk to Woodrow Wilson. Now, he's, one of my number one guys that I love to hate. I think it would be interesting. Yeah, it'd be cool to go back and kill him right before he became president. That would save us a lot of grief. Then again, someone else might have just come in and done similar stuff at that time, though. But I think it would be interesting to go back to some of these like original first generation progressives and present them with the results of their ideas. Because I think to a large extent we are living, ideas have consequences. And we are living in the consequences of the ideas of people like Woodrow Wilson.
And you think they'd be swayable?
I wonder if you could show him how it has played out.
You think an evil person knows they're evil?
Yeah, I don't know. I think some might. I don't think Woodrow Wilson thought he was evil. I think Woodrow Wilson very much, he literally thought he was doing God's work. He was a very religious guy. He thought his politics was like the right side of history. And if you could show him where it is led over a century, would he rethink his ideas? Or would he say, no, that's fine. That's actually what I intended?
I feel like they want this course. I feel like they know what they're doing.
I think in some ways they do. If you look back, Woodrow Wilson is... One of the reasons I find him so interesting is because he was an academic for 30 years before he ever ran for political office. And so he's got 30 years of writings and teachings about like history and political science that you can go look at. And you get a window into his brain that you don't get from just about any other president we've had. And a lot of what we have that we're living with in terms of what the American system is, he actually was thinking up, and not just him, but other progressive intellectuals too at the time. Woodrow Wilson talked about modern democracy. He basically said that progressivism, he believed that every society on earth was evolving towards an end point of history. He believed there was an end of history, and it was what he called modern democracy. And that every society on earth is evolving down this path towards the end point of modern democracy, just some are more advanced than others down that path. And that he thought that he was helping to bring in this good and inevitable end result. And then when you look at what he actually described when he talked about modern democracy, it's pretty much the oligarchy with a democratic veneer that we have. Like, he wanted there to be elections, he wanted there to be people voting, but he also wanted a huge amount of what the government actually is and does to be firewalled off from elections. He was a big proponent of basically what we now think of as the deep state. The idea that there would be this big administrative, bureaucratic apparatus to the government that is insulated from elections. And that's pretty much what we have. Where, we can elect a new president, but all you have to do is look at Trump's first term, right? He's about as much of an outsider that the establishment hates that has ever been in the White House. And yet, if you look at his first term, how much really changed? The Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, they largely just kind of kept doing what they wanted to do. And he could replace someone at the top. Half the time he picked someone who was from the swamp anyway. Even when he did, anybody who knows anything about how giant bureaucratic institutions work knows that you can replace the guy at the top and he can come in with, I'm going to clean house and drain the swamp and whatever. And all those countless thousands of people that still work there who have been there for 30 years, they're just going to keep kind of doing what they want to do.
Think a second term will be any different?
I'm a little bit skeptical.
Who do you like right now?
In politics?
Yeah.
I think either Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr. would be better than Trump. Just because I think they're both more intelligent in most ways and that they understand what they're up against more. I think the biggest problem with Trump is that even now, after all that they've done to him and all the lawfare and 2 impeachments and multiple assassination attempts and all this sort of thing, I still get the sense when I hear him speak that he still doesn't understand what he's really up against. So what about them operating underneath him? What about Tulsi Gabbard on his staff, Vivek on his staff, RFK on the staff? It might make it better than the first term. I think they're still going to face huge resistance at every turn. And then I wonder, too, I just saw something recently, just a little headline or something about, Jared Kushner is, Trump's son-in-law, big Zionist, not at all anti-establishment, really, as far as I can tell. Oh, yeah, Jared Kushner is, again, going to have a huge amount of input on Trump's staffing decisions and whatever like that. And just like, I don't know. I don't think he's really learned enough.
Got it. Do you think we went to the moon?
I'm agnostic about that, to be honest with you.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I wouldn't put it past the
Well,
American establishment to
they've
fake it.
admitted they had a set for in
Yeah.
case it didn't happen. So why,
Yeah, yeah. There's enough things that
and then all the crazy shit about right now with the space station, and you see the cables, and then they've got this full movie set in the pool, and
right.
wild. Is the Earth flat or is the Earth round?
I believe the Earth is round.
Okay.
Yeah,
Any
I've not been persuaded.
any conspiracy theories that you do not believe?
There's, I mean, I don't believe the David Icke lizard people thing.
Okay, but I like Ike. I mean, they totally destroyed Ike. I mean, there must be something to what he
Well,
was saying.
I think he's actually correct if you take it metaphorically.
Okay.
Because I think that the people that run the world, they are, I believe, mostly literal actual psychopaths.
I believe that too.
And psychopaths are essentially reptilian. They're very cold-blooded. They're very, they don't care if they start a war on lies to give themselves more money and power, and it kills a million random innocent civilians. They don't lose any sleep over that. So they are reptilian in the sense of that they don't have a conscience like we do. But
I feel like they almost meet on an island someplace, and it's like a chess game to them.
yeah,
Like, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to wipe out 1 million people, and he's like, okay, I'm going to see you, and I'll wipe out 2 million. Literally, just in a move of a chess piece.
yeah, and I've sometimes wondered if at the highest levels there's not.
Brandon? No. Lock that door.
I've sometimes wondered if at the highest levels there's not collusion between world leaders who appear to be adversaries in a WWF way.
Yeah, I believe that, man. I feel like Trump went over and talked to Putin or somebody and said, okay, you do this, and you roll up to Ukraine, and we're going to fund Ukraine, and then you do these moves, and we're going to get these guys. And I feel like it's literally just, it's a creation of money, or even a manipulation of game, or a reduction in population, or a population that maybe you don't want, right? We send them into the grinder. I think that there's probably something to that.
Yeah, there's a very interesting document that a lot of people thought was real. I think it's been pretty definitively proven to have been not exactly a hoax, but sort of like a parody. It's called The Report from Iron Mountain. And it came out in the late 60s, and it claimed to be like the report of a super high level, super top secret government appointed thing to research what would happen if we actually had peace? What would happen if we actually figured out a way to not fight wars between different countries anymore? And the report from Iron Mountain basically says, oh, it'd be a disaster. Our society would spin out of control and break down, and that war has this kind of like eugenic effect of killing off the riffraff of different societies, and it drives our economy forward to have constant wars, and which I don't actually believe, but this is what the document's saying. And I think a lot of people at the top do believe stuff like that. I do think that some of them actually believe, like, oh yeah, if we didn't have thousands of nukes pointed at Russia and they had them pointed at us, and we're constantly fighting proxy wars or whatever, that like society couldn't hold together and the economy couldn't function without that
Well,
happening.
I think it's that they couldn't maintain the power they have.
For sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Have you ever been going down a conspiracy theory thread that you didn't think was real, and then you decided that it probably is?
Yeah, I mean 9/11, I definitely I'm on 9/11, my view is I don't know exactly what the whole truth and nothing but the truth is, and I'm skeptical that we'll ever really know for sure the entire truth. But I definitely have learned enough stuff about it over the years that for sure I don't believe that the official story is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Another one that I kind of got red-pilled on long time ago when I was still probably like a teenager is the JFK assassination. And, when I was growing up, I just kind of took the official story at face value. Oh, yeah, it's this lone nut, Lee Harvey Oswald, killed the president. Then Jack Ruby kills him in a police station in front of everybody, and that's kind of that, open and shut. But then, I just started to learn just little tidbits here and there that kind of made my spidey sense go up. And there's a bunch of them in the case of the Kennedy assassination, which is something I do plan on covering in my podcast. I actually was intending on starting to cover the Kennedy assassination on my podcast last year, and then right as I was getting to the home stretch on my first episode on that is when my wife's back blew up, and I had to put everything on hold, for a long time. But yeah, the Kennedy assassination. Like at this point, I'm pretty convinced. It was largely CIA behind that.
Yeah.
And there were just these little red flags that would just make me go, huh. And a big one for me early on was Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby killing Oswald. That was one where the more I learned about that, the more I was like, this does not make sense. And then I started to look more into Jack Ruby's background and find weird red flags there. And then I actually read some Warren Commission transcripts, and there's some weird stuff in there from Jack Ruby. There's some weird passages where Jack Ruby is talking to the Warren Commission, and he's saying like, hey, there's way more to this story than you know. I've got all kinds of stuff I could spill the beans on to you. And basically, he sounds, when you read the transcript, he sounds fearful for his safety. And he's basically telling the Warren Commission, look, bring me to D.C., put me under super-duper protection, and I'll spill my guts on all this crazy stuff I know. I think his exact words were something like, it would knock your socks off if you heard, what I had to say. And then the Warren Commissioners basically are like, no thanks,
Yeah.
we're not interested. And so it's things like that where you're like, oh, okay, the Warren Commission had nothing to do with making a real legit investigation. Because if you were doing a legitimate investigation whose goal was to get to the bottom of the actual truth, you would at least want to know what he had to say. It might turn out to be a bunch of nonsense, but you'd at least want to hear it.
It was a facade.
Yeah, and so, even before you get to all the stuff about the magic bullet and all those ballistic things and whatever that are preposterous, like even before you get to that, it's just like, wait a minute. The guy that supposedly kills the president is in police custody for a matter of hours, and a random mafia-connected, which also means CIA-connected, strip club owner walks into a police station with a gun in his pocket, shoots Oswald in front of the entire nation on TV, and claims that his motivation for doing that was that he was so upset about Mrs. Kennedy, being upset about the whole thing that he had. I'm just thinking, like, even if, like, let's say there was a president that I really liked and he got assassinated in the town I live in, and then in a matter of hours they're like, oh, we got the guy, he's in custody.
Let me throw my life away.
Yeah. Would I actually be like, even though they got the guy, I'm still just so pissed that they killed my president that I'm going to go walk into a police station in front of TV news and shoot the guy in broad daylight.
So what do you think that was?
Yeah, I think it was tying up loose ends. Dead men tell no tales. I think they had some kind of leverage on Ruby. Ruby was very mob connected. A lot of the mob hated Kennedy. I know there's Kennedy there's like 1,000 variations of the Kennedy assassination, conspiracy theories. I know some people think like the mafia was ultimately behind it. I think the mafia might have played supporting roles in various ways, as they often do for American intelligence. But I think ultimately it was, a bunch of high up guys in the CIA, Allen Dulles, being one of the ringleaders, but others too.
Did Ruby go home that night, or did they take him into custody?
When he shot Oswald?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he was arrested on the spot.
Did he ever get out? Was he ever...
That's a good question.
I wonder what happened to that guy.
I think he eventually died in prison.
Got it.
Of some sort of, natural causes. And
I wonder how they got him to do that.
Yeah, my suspicion is, and I'm not saying I have the answer for sure on this, my suspicion is they might have done something with threatening his family. Because what else would cause a person to be willing to do that?
Do you think MK Ultra worked?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to make of Sirhan. That's a weird one. Or
and why would they shut a program down like that?
So that they could restart it
under
a couple years later with a different code name. And yeah, I mean, you look at all that stuff that got shut down in the 70s with the church committee and everything like that. Pretty much all of it they just started doing again under different code names.
Did you ever do an episode on Montauk?
Montauk.
The Montauk Project and the Montauk children. That base. I don't remember. Where is Montauk?
I think is it by Boston?
Montauk is, I know where it is. It's out on the tip of Long Island. Very
Stranger
end of Long
Things are
Island.
supposed to have been based off of that, I think, the TV show. With
Yeah.
The kids.
Yeah, no, I think I've heard stuff about that, but
Yeah.
it's not one of the ones that I've ever dug into.
What's a podcast episode that you're most proud of?
One of them, and I still need to make the sequels to it. One of the ones I'm most proud of is one I did maybe a year or two ago, and it was on British propaganda operations in the United States during World War One, during the period when the U.S. government was officially supposedly neutral, and excuse me, the British government carried out a massive propaganda operation in the United States to persuade the American people, the American media, whatever, that in World War One, Germany was pure evil, bent on taking over the world, and Team America had to do something to stop them. And if America didn't get in to finally stop the German menace, America's going to be next in the crosshairs.
Do you think in World War II the Germans would have been on the course they were on had that not happened previously in World War One and in the Treaty of Versailles and all that?
Oh, I think it's very unlikely that Nazism would have ever become a major force had World War One ended in a different way.
Do you think Nazism was exactly as it's stated? Or do you think there's is it as history has written it?
I mean, I think they were bad guys, I'm open to the possibility that like certain details are not the truth about certain things. I have a hard time believing that they were actually the good guys and that like all the stories about them doing bad stuff were completely 100% fabricated.
Sure. Episode you were most proud of?
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then we were talking about Hitler was not the good guy, definitely evil. What do you think they were seeking when they were sending all those people all around the world, like Antarctica and all that stuff? What do you think they were after?
Probably the Holy Grail, the Spear of Longinus.
Just collecting them, or you think that he thought maybe they had some power if you got them all together?
I can't say I'm an expert on this, but it definitely does seem like he and some of his sidekicks believed in some of that occult type stuff.
Have you looked into Operation High Jump at all?
Operation High
Admiral
Jump.
Byrd, the expedition to the Antarctic.
No.
And when he came back on national news, he said that we won't ever have to worry about oil and gasoline again. We found all kinds of minerals and another race of people in flying spaceships in the Antarctic, and it's not actually frozen, and there's a whole tropical world.
No.
Man, I would love to see you do an episode on that.
No. That one's completely new to me.
There's some material out there on it. Yeah, I'd love to see you pull that one.
Yeah. It's tricky when you get into the kind of, counter-establishment history and alternative narratives and whatever like that. It's tricky because on the one hand, you quickly realize you can never trust the establishment. They're, in some way or another, they're lying pretty much all the time. Like, even when they're telling you things that are true, they're doing it in a way that's deceptive. It's like cherry-picked, to lie by omission and whatever. But at the same time, there is also kooky
Sure.
stuff out there. And so you end up, if you're just trying to get to the truth as close as you can and you're just trying to be intellectually honest with your audience, you end up having to be just as skeptical about the alternative versions as about the right ones, because
They're a lot more fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they can sometimes just be amusing just if they're ridiculous. But it's like, yeah, I don't believe the Warren Commission version of the JFK assassination. That doesn't mean that every alternative explanation is equally, plausible and valid, and and a lot of stuff floats around even after it's been pretty well debunked. Like one of the JFK assassination theories that, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty well debunked is the idea that he was assassinated because he wanted to get rid of the Federal Reserve, and they point to like the silver certificates and whatever. It's been a while since I looked into that, but basically that to me looks like a red herring. But it's still floating around. I still every now and then have a person, usually someone who hasn't listened to my podcast very much, just like a little bit, who will be like, oh, and did you know that the Federal Reserve killed Kennedy because he wanted to get rid of the Federal Reserve and issue silver certificates and blah, blah,
How
blah,
about Federal Reserve? All the people that wanted to found the Federal Reserve, or the majority of them, were actually on the Titanic and left within 12 hours of the Titanic departing. They actually unboarded or
Yeah.
missed the voyage. And then most of the people who were vehemently opposed to the Federal Reserve actually died on the Titanic. Have you heard any of that?
I've heard versions of that where there's some interesting, people that normally would have been expected to be on that voyage who weren't. And that's always interesting, right? When people like conveniently don't show up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's definitely stuff like that in regard to 9/11. I'm sure you're familiar with, where it's like, oh, certain top people just randomly didn't go to work that day.
And Timothy McVeigh, same thing.
How so?
I heard that a bunch of the federal agents were not actually.
Oh, yeah.
No federal agents were there. It was even though it wasn't a holiday.
Yeah.
And then what was blown up there. It said that a bunch of the Gulf War syndrome files were kept right there where that explosive
Yeah.
took place. Just like Rumsfeld at the Pentagon said, we're missing $63 trillion or whatever the number was the night before.
Yeah.
And then the Tomahawk missile or the airplane or whatever hit that piece of the Pentagon, blew out where all those computers were, where all
Right.
that information was supposed to have been stored.
Yeah. There's always interesting stuff like that, especially with anything that looks like it might be a false flag, right? Where you look at who would normally have been in the danger zone, who wasn't. And there's another thing, and I want to revisit this on my podcast a bit, but I covered it a while ago. I believe the USS Maine was a false flag to start the Spanish-American War. And it's very interesting when you look into, like, I do believe that there was a bomb, but it wasn't, from the outside set by the Spanish, that it was an inside job. And you look at where the explosion happened in the Maine and who was killed by it. And it's been a few years since I dug into this, so I'm a little fuzzy on the details off the top of my head, but it's something like it went off in a way that it killed a whole bunch of low-level enlisted men. But the officers' quarters and whatever like that was largely spared by the explosion. And a lot of the officers who were on the Maine at the time were connected to the Office of Naval Intelligence. They were like guys who had just been deployed to the Maine fairly recently, and prior to that had done a stint working at Naval Intelligence.
Interesting.
And, conveniently the bomb goes off, if it was a bomb or an accident, whatever. But it just happens to go off in such a way that the ONI connected officers that were on the boat pretty much okay.
All right, yeah.
And a bunch of random 18-year-old Marines and sailors get,
As
blown
always.
to bits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, man.
Same thing with Pearl Harbor, right? Where, the carriers weren't there and, other little details like
Yep.
that, where Pearl Harbor is all kinds of a
Or the
setup.
Gulf of Tonkin, or the one that the Israelis, bombed.
Oh, yeah, the USS Liberty, man, that I'm still trying to figure out what the hell was really going on there, because it's pretty clear it was not an accident, mistaken identity. There's no way it could have been. But I'm still trying to figure out, like, what really was the upside from the Israeli government's point of view of doing that. I don't know. As of right now, I have no good answers to it.
Have you ever heard of Tartaria?
I don't think so.
Mud flood,
No.
free energy.
Okay.
So are you familiar with any of that?
Not really, no.
Alternate history. History is not what it actually said to have been, but every 200 years or so, history resets itself with mud flood. And you see the excavations and such. We have all these cities that they're unearthing, these magnificent cities that are just seemingly under flowed earth. And then people will say, well, that's just because they built a city on top of a city because, and then they, rerouted the roads and such. And then when you look at old architecture, it's amazing compared to almost the brutalism that we have
Right.
now and how dumbed down everything is. And we just put this facade, and when they have to work on the facade, you have these incredible buildings that have just been carved out of granite and stone and stuff. And you have all these arch and towers and stuff. And they say that it was to harvest electricity because everything was free energy. And then when they found oil, the oil tycoons figured out a way to kind of erase that history so that they could sell the oil. I think that that's kind of what it's based on. There's a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I think that people in power often will create conditions of artificial scarcity because then that gives them power.
They say that you see all these placards on these magnificent buildings that says founded. And anytime it says founded, they didn't actually build it. They actually found it. They came into this society where there were no people. And then they talk about all the asylums and stuff. It was people that they were putting into these huge asylums that kind of remembered the past. And then when you've heard of baby trains, you ever heard that they used to mail children across by train? They would just move kids in the mail. You would mail your children to your relatives and such.
No.
Just look it up, and I'd love for you
Okay.
to just look at it and go,
Baby
"This,
trains.
John, this is complete bullshit," or go, "Holy shit, there's actually something. Maybe there's here." Coney Island. They had all these baby incubators on display at Coney Island, apparently, and during the World Fairs. And you could go, and there was all these babies in these incubators, and there was always a question as to where their parents were and where all these children came from.
Yeah.
And it all ties in with the World's Fairs. We had these huge, huge buildings, and they said, well, we just razed them to the ground because they were paper mache.
Yeah. That whole thing is interesting. I can't say I've looked into it a ton.
You had
but
these
yeah.
huge Westinghouse power generation facilities and just amazing things.
Yeah.
And the architecture, and they're like, well, it was just temporary, and we just wiped it away.
Yeah, and that's another era that I think is very interesting. Another one I would be interested to go back and just check out is kind of like Gilded Age America.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there is an alternate history that could have happened where, imagine the United States never got maneuvered into World War One, and therefore, World War II probably wouldn't happen, at least not the way it did. And then, how much more, if you look at the amount of resources that the U.S. has sunk into these wars, and then even when there's not an active war going on, they're just, putting all this money, all these resources and our best scientific minds into the military-industrial complex. And then think about, man, if all of that capital and all of those brilliant scientific minds hadn't been over there designing the next biggest ICBM, would we have cars that run on happy thoughts?
Yeah.
And, refrigerators that use like almost no energy. And,
Yeah, Tesla said that he could, grab energy just out of the air.
Yeah. Yeah, and that there's definitely...
And then the weirdness around his disappearance or assassination, and then the government coming in and seizing his files right out of his laboratory and such. It said.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. He's an interesting guy. Like, what exactly is the truth about him, and how much of the stuff attributed to him is just urban legends and whatever versus how much is real? Yeah, that's a fascinating rabbit hole.
Well, man, where can they find you at?
Go to dangeroushistorypodcast.com or just look for the Dangerous History Podcast wherever you like to consume your audio podcasts. I am also starting to get a little bit more active on YouTube finally.
Good.
So I'm starting to make some video versions of some of my episodes and things like that. So
Awesome.
yeah, look for me on YouTube as well, Dangerous History Podcast.
Well, thanks for coming in, man.
You're welcome.
You guys, listen to something. I'm telling you, it's fascinating. Listen to his content. Leave him some comments. Let him know that you're there. And it always helps if you share those, take those, and send that content that you enjoyed, and just share it with other people. Send it to them. It helps the algorithm immensely.
For sure. Help spread the gospel of CJ. And if nothing else, you will help me to keep a roof over my family's head.
Thanks you, man. We'll see you next time.
I built this thing from the bottom, they tore it down, I rebuilt it. I give myself a task, you can bet your ass I fulfill it. Yeah, man, I'm talking about realest, one of the realest to try. My family.